All right, welcome back. This is a pretty special edition of the Supply Chaney podcast, and uh, it's episode 100. And so, for the first time, we have our fearless host in the guest chair. And so, let me start. I'm Curtis Pogue, and I was actually the guest for episode 1. So, we thought it would be fun to flip the mic on Nathan and have Nathan be the guest for the Supply Chaney podcast because people are asking the question, who's Nathan Chaney? So here we go. I mean, you should introduce yourself because you're clearly going to do a better job than I can. So Nathan Chaney, tell us a little
All
bit about
right.
yourself. It's an intro.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, like you said, my name is Nathan Chaney, and I host a podcast called the Supply Chaney Podcast. And but really, I'm a Texan, born and raised all throughout Texas. A little bit of time in the city, most of the time out on the farm, and kind of follow the traditional path of high school and then, kind of listening to everyone saying you got to go to college. So I did that and fortunately got a little bit of advice that you should go study logistics. And so I went and did that and was just fortunate to find that logistics and supply chain management was a discipline and a profession that would keep me busy and an income stream over the years to pay the bills. And now I get to kind of call the supply chain industry, home and spend most of my days talking to people about supply chains, shooting videos about supply chains, and texting people about supply chains. Pretty much supply chain all day long, all day. And I guess that's a little bit why I went with the name supply chain, something like that.
Well, and I mean, there's so much to unpack here, and I take for granted the bias of knowing you. So tell me more about Supply Chaney. Where'd the name come from? How did you walk us through just kind of, I mean, walk us through a little bit of your background. Uh, where'd you grow up? How did you get into supply chain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So I grew up in East Texas. The town that I grew up in had 30,000 cows and about 300 people. My graduating class had about 35 students in the senior class. Um, and what's funny is, I was not even the top 10% because that's only 3.5 students. And so, went from, had these ideas of going to University of Texas Austin or Texas A&M, these really big campuses. But I was, like I said, in this class of 35, so I didn't think I'm going to from 35 to 35,000 was really like the right step. So I went to junior college instead, Tyler Junior College, thinking that I would get a smaller, like kind of tight knit campus type feel. But it actually turns out that Tyler Junior College was one of the largest junior colleges in the US. And like about 10,000 students, which is bigger than a decent number of four-year universities. And I was like, in my very first semester, I was an RA in my dorm. And so from day like one, I was already put in charge of my peers and being a leader, which I always advocate for people considering going to a junior college or something like that. Is the cool thing is that you get exposure and you get the opportunity to be a leader much earlier in your college career versus being at a four-year school where you're typically going to be waiting until you're a junior or senior to be a leader of some sort.
And an RA was,
Residential hall assistant. Yeah.
that's it. That's it.
Um,
I ended up getting a house instead of a dorm, and so I like to have parties. So yeah, couldn't remember.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was in the nerd club. I breathed and lived and did everything school. I had enough scholarships because of being in the band. I was in the band the first year or two of college. I played the French horn, and because of that, I got a
Okay,
full ride scholarship. And
nice.
I was a tutor, and I volunteered a lot, and all these sort of things, and was able to get enough scholarship money to pay for everything, which was fortunate because my parents, did not help at all. And so I was able to kind of make that happen. And but I still worked. I've always worked, mowing yards and cleaning fence lines and painting fences and all sort of stuff, throwing hay growing up. So I've always had this kind of country boy work ethic that I kind of still, I guess, seem to bring to the job today. But yeah, grew up in the farm. went to college a little bit, got my associate's degree. Um, heeded the advice of the one professor that said you should go study logistics, and so did that at the University of North Texas. And while there, part of the program was that you had to have a paid internship, and so they also facilitated that. So they kind of helped make sure that the students were able to go get one. And so my first one was at Siva Logistics, and then second was at PepsiCo. And one of the best sort of pieces of advice I ever got was that you should always try to do more than one internship when you're in school, because it's kind of like trying on shoes. It gives you an opportunity to go check out different parts of the industry, kind of see what you really want to do before you kind of make that long-term commitment. So that's kind of how things got their start.
Nice. Well, and then I mean, that's a good segue into, right, the career walkthrough, right? So, you gave us a little bit of background on like where you grew up and how you were, some of the things that impacted you and your work ethic and then education. So you got a logistics and supply chain degree, which we both went to the same school. That's how we got connected up. A little bit of
Uh-huh.
different times, but so yeah, give us some more about your career walkthrough, right? Like, I mean, your internship into what?
Yeah, so I was wrapping up my time in school while I was an intern at PepsiCo, and this was also around 2008, 2009, when the
Mhm.
economy was in the
Oh,
toilet, and
yeah.
so they had a hiring freeze indefinitely, and they said you can remain a intern indefinitely. We don't know when this will lift, but we will probably hire you afterwards. But or you could go find a full-time job if you can. And so, being kind of the ambitious sort of person I was, 30 hours a week was not going to cut it for me. So,
Right.
I kind of got matched up to a 3PL that was just starting at the time, called Crane Worldwide, Crane Freight Services, and
Oh,
spent a
yeah.
few years there helping to get, they had just won the Harley Davidson account. And so kind of like some of my first experience there was helping to get the Harley Davidson distribution network coming out of the plant in Milwaukee, and bringing in raw materials back into the plant on runs heading back in. And then did some brokerage because we had our own dedicated fleet of Warner trucks. So we would broker out when those trucks were empty. And all these things were things that I would go on to use kind of later on in life, not knowing that I would. But that was my earliest taste of like freight brokerage. I actually worked on like the Dish Network account and tracked and traced containers coming across from Asia, going into Denver and Atlanta by rail. And so I kind of just got to touch a little bit of everything. Um, and to wrap up my time at Crane, I was put in charge of a warehouse and distribution account as well. And so I got to spend some time out in the warehouse and manage that as well. So I really got to touch kind of like everything there is to do just about on the 3PL side within the first 3 years of my career.
Wow.
And that was fortunate, I guess, probably looking back at it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what a great opportunity. And and I know we've talked about this, but Jim Crane, I mean, he had a lot of influence on my career as well.
Uh-huh.
I had a dinner and I asked him as a young student, what should I do? And he definitely gave me some direction and guidance. And so that's really cool that by proxy kind of those things, those paths
Yeah.
cross. So okay, so then what? I mean, what and then and what and I hate to sound cliche when I ask this, but, like, what were some of the lessons and things that you took away from that job that have
Yeah.
carried over, right?
Probably the best one that I took from that was always do kind of like your best, always do your best, which of course is
Yeah.
super overused and cliche, but there's a
Sure.
reason for that. And that's
Please.
because my manager, my boss there, I would make PowerPoints and spreadsheets and kind of just, I was an analyst, right? Like a good old entry level
What?
logistics analyst. And I thought that I made some pretty good PowerPoints and spreadsheets. At the time I was the youngest one in the office. And so therefore it's usually the youngest person that's put in charge of anything digital and innovative, I guess. And so he took note of that. And so when he left Crane to go start up a whole new division at Mainfreight, and his name is Dallas Wines, he remembered me, and he remembered that I was decent at making PowerPoints and doing spreadsheets and analysis. And so he brought me over and kind of pulled me over from Crane to be kind of the second hire in that new division that he was starting. And that kicked off what would then be 6 years at Mainfreight that took me around the world a bit. And I also got to, in my mid 20s, build and run new 3PL facilities, be in charge of the full 3PL, the hiring, the sales, the build out, the setup of processes. And looking back at it right now, I'm like, oh my gosh, how in the world was I ever given that kind of trust at that age? But what was really cool is that they just allowed you to, I used to like to say I used to run my own facility like it was my own, popsicle stand or whatnot. And as long as at the end of the day the P&L balanced and I was bringing in profit to the bigger organization, then you could kind of do what you wanted. And that was a really cool training ground for being an entrepreneur, which I had always dreamed of being. Um, and so yeah, so 6 years at Main Freight helping to start up that basically the warehouse division there. Um, from there, I was the president of CSCMP, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals at the time
Yes.
in DFW.
Yeah.
And I was in charge of our events. And so one of the events I set up was a tour of a Texas Instruments facility, manufacturing facility in DFW. After that, I was following up with one of those guys from TI. And about this time, I was ready to make a career transition, as you could say. And I just sparked the conversation with them. And kind of the power of networking is that you never know kind of what doors are going to open, and
Oh, sure.
having a network before you need it is important. And
Oh,
so when
yeah.
I broached the topic, they were very receptive, and kind of said, hey, would love to have you here at TI. Let us know, what job you would like, pretty much. And that was quite fascinating. Um, but I guess to close out what I mentioned a while ago, you're asking what lesson did I take away? I was talking about always doing your best. And that is because people are always watching and people are going to see and remember things, even things that you don't think are important or really, meaningful. You never know like how that looks to other folks. So if you're always doing your best, then people are going to always remember you for doing a good job. And that kind of will help you go places. And I think that also that also transferred over to that transition to TI because they could kind of see how I was managing and leading the CSCMP roundtable in DFW. I forced us to have 2 events a month, way overkill, but that's just kind of how I roll. And so that led to TI for a few years. So I got to spend some time in that semiconductor world that everyone kind of talks about these days because computer chips are so important. Um,
Sure.
and that was also my big corporate America experience as well,
Yeah.
which I really, I realized that being a small country boy, corporate America is not the best fit for me, but I do feel like it's important that everyone have that experience so you can kind of just know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Um, and then went a complete 180 and went to a Silicon Valley tech startup called Gatik and was a field operations manager for them. Basically running pilot projects with really big companies that were trying out autonomous vehicles and so building and running operations for a fleet of autonomous trucks here throughout Texas. And so that was a good bit of work. And again, it pushed me to go do something different and learn a different language that I hadn't known before. So a whole lot of stuff. It's a pretty long, winding road, and honestly, at the end of the day, I was kind of just always chasing a little bit bigger paycheck, a little bit better title each time. To be honest, I didn't really have a grand master plan in mind. But looking back on it now, I think I could be like, oh, there was something kind of in the works there that I
Oh,
didn't know.
sure, yeah, and at the time, Ganik had some respectable accounts as well that you got to work on and deploy, projects on, right? You wanna talk and
Sure.
and again, I know this already, but, um, to your audience and those who do listen and those who would wanna know a little bit more about Nathan, and then also we gotta unpack a little bit more about the power of networking and how that's led to where we're at today from the TI standpoint, and then and as we go on. But continue on to get it because I think that that story is extremely interesting, and your role and participation in that, and where they're at today also is kind of fun. So
I don't know exactly where they're at, but I did just see the CEO founder got him is still on state industry stages and talking. Um, but the biggest takeaway that I took from that is that you don't have to have everything figured out before you go start a company. You can kind of have an idea and a direction you want to go. And the other thing I took away from that is that if you have something that's really, really innovative, that's really cutting edge, there's a lot of companies that will sign up and work for you simply to be able to say, look, we're being innovative. If you're a service provider,
Yeah.
if you're doing, interesting things, that you're going to get a certain amount of business simply because you are the cool new thing in town. And people want to attach their brand to what you're doing, and kind of use it as a bit of a PR and marketing play. And
Yeah.
that was probably like one thing that I took away from that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Well, and then and in the autonomous space, right? I mean, we just reached a place literally within the last couple of weeks where, right, with Aurora, I mean, autonomous vehicles has been commercialized, right? I mean, it is truly a milestone in our careers, of what the future looks like. And I don't want to downplay that, but you very much have had a role and participation in that, and that's super cool. Yeah, little thumbprint of Nathan on that.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like if I was just kind of like put a cap on that point, um, back to that networking and creating relationships, obviously within the company you're working for, but outside. One of those folks, that I worked with there went on to go be part of another autonomous vehicle startup, which that person then suggested that I go and help out that startup as well. And so, so
Which
now
is
I still have my foot in the autonomous space
yeah.
with a company called Newport Robotics,
Oh,
and
love those
and
guys.
so again, it was that doing a good job at all times with everybody, because the people that you're working with will either hire you in the future or may go somewhere else that they put in a good work for you and introduce you, right? So again, just always like, again, it's the lamest thing in the world, but always doing your best does actually pay dividends in the long
Yeah.
run.
Look, it's a cliche for a reason, right? I mean, right, and I speak to that quite a bit. Like, it's a cliche for a reason because it's true and
Yeah,
it works.
yeah.
All right, so then we're at Gaddy. So we went from TI, we went to Gaddy.
We're about
We still have
two-thirds of the way through the journey here.
yeah, no, so what's next? Yeah, like
Yeah.
how do we move on
So
from there?
yeah, yeah. I was at about the time, I put in a little bit of time there, realized that the startup world was not really cut out for me. I wasn't really cut out for that. And for a number of reasons. But about that time also, I felt like I was finally kind of at a point to go scratch that entrepreneurial itch that I've had. I've always had these side hustles. You and I have always had these side
Yeah,
projects over all these years.
sure.
Um,
I believe
and
we have some patents and other things.
Yeah. So I was finally ready to go give that a shot in real life. And I tell people it was a little bit one. I felt like I had a network big enough to be able to feel safe doing that. I had enough expertise and experience in the industry to do that, and I had enough bills paid off and enough money in the savings account to
Yeah,
feel ready to do that. And so, I'm a reasonably conservative, fiscally conservative person, and so that took a lot to do that. And so whenever I'm talking to folks that are considering starting up something on their own or going out on their own, it's definitely my first suggestion is, just have some money in the bank and ready to go just in case it doesn't work. And have that network in case it doesn't work. You can pull the parachute, and have a plan B. So,
yeah, yeah.
so far, about 4 years in now, I haven't had to pull a parachute line yet.
Yeah, well,
So
and
yeah.
the thing is that, what's interesting and so for our listeners, specifically now, we have transitioned into the creation of supply chaining.
Mhm.
So from Gaddick, right? It's the creation of supply chaining,
Yep.
and boy, that has gone through some different iterations and it has evolved and pivoted. And
Yep.
but at the end of the day, right? It fundamentally is tapped into back in the TI days of the power of networking, right? And the participation and involvement from a leadership standpoint that you had with industry groups. So, okay, so now kick it off. Tell us about
All right.
supply chain.
Yeah, let's see if we want to call this like the fifth stop on the journey here. So,
Yeah,
um, so yeah,
fifth and final, maybe hard to say.
fifth and final maybe. So I just didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but people that talk to me know that I usually say that when you're leaving corporate world and you're going to go out on your own, kind of the first thing everyone does is just start up a consulting business. Nathan Chaney Consulting LLC. Um, but I sat there and brainstormed like anyone does. What am I going to call this thing? And at some point, the word supply chain popped into my head, and I was like, supply and chain is my name, and all this stuff. And so I wrote it down, and I said it out loud a few times, and I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. It's kind of like people not liking the sound of their own voice, or the sound of nails on a chalkboard. That's what supply chain sounded like to me, saying it out loud the first few times. Um, Looking back now, of course, I'm like, well, obviously I had to get over that because everyone that I went and pitched this to, and I said, hey, here's some names that I came up with to like call this business thing I'm going to start. And every time I said supply chain, like everyone just like, went up. So I was like, well, clearly, I guess that's a good thing. I'll go run with that, despite it feeling weird and awkward to me. And I don't really want to hear my name every day, all the time. But like I said, I got over it. So the first thing I did was do some independent consulting type stuff for 3PLs. Um, and I used that networking, kept networking like I always had. Stumbled upon an opportunity with actually because I was working with you, Curtis, and you had your Landstar agency at the moment, and I was like, hey, you're out in the mountains. I'm here in Dallas. I'll do some business development stuff for you. And well, kind of stumbled upon an opportunity to open up a different freight brokerage business. So I did that, along with doing the fractional consulting as well. So stood that thing up, and I was an agent under a company called SPI Logistics. And I made that choice. I dated around, I like to say, what brokerage I wanted to operate under. And I ultimately chose SPI a little bit because they had a nice TMS. They used Revenova, which was somewhat a modern TMS. And also because they were based in Canada. And I've never met an upset or angry or an unkind Canadian before. And the people that you want to
Sure.
work with and work for, whatnot, you want to be able to like appreciate and like have that likability. So I did that for a couple of years, and that's actually where our paths crossed again, and I was able to kind of pull you back over and ask for your help on this brokerage business. And as all things, got a little bit bored again. And so I, at the same time as doing some consulting and this freight brokerage, I had this feeling that I wanted to go start a YouTube channel and that I would film videos of processes and warehouses and factories. And I wanted it to have like this MTV Cribs meets how it's made vibe, but for logistics. And did a few episodes, for free for friends and businesses that I could get to let me in the door here in the DFW area. And it didn't really go anywhere. No one's really going onto YouTube to go watch B2B content about warehouses and factories. And so, but what I did notice is that the people that were making content and putting it on YouTube and stuff actually were putting their podcasts out there on YouTube and whatnot. So I was
Yeah.
like, well, I've never actually listened to many podcasts, other than my favorite one, which is How I Built This. So you could probably pick up on the theme there. So my favorite was always How I Built This. I know you and I always would recommend episodes to each other to go listen to. Um, and and so I was like, well, if these people seem to be the ones, creating content and doing cool things in the industry, well, maybe that's my path forward. So I went and actually SPI was a sponsor, I think still is, of Life, of the Everything is Logistics podcast. And so they asked her to have me on as a guest. So I did that. And then Chris Jolly and the Freight Coach was also kind of, he's actually also an SPI agent as well. He's also got a podcast. So they kind of somehow I got onto his as well. And so I kind of just went around trying to do some research and think about, do I really want to launch this podcast? And if I do, I should go see how the sausage is made and be a guest first. And so did that a few times and then felt like I was ready to pull the trigger. And so that kind of is what started the Supply Chain podcast, which was like that next step after the YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, After the YouTube kind of didn't really go anywhere. And then it was podcast. And then it was, I think at that point in time, I think I started the Supply Chain Social Club. And that was because of networking. And I kind of took that, to your point, that idea of what I did with CSCMP of hosting events and bringing people together and just doing a lot of networking. I just really liked that. I especially liked doing it over beer. And so that was really kind of what started the Supply Chain Social Club, is this desire to have an opportunity and create an opportunity for people that live in West Monroe, Louisiana, or people that have 5 kids, each one of them having soccer practice, dance practices, piano lessons every day, and not being able to get away to a conference or a networking association event, or just not being in geographic proximity to one because they're in Fargo, North Dakota, or whatever it might be. So that was really kind of the inspiration for starting the Supply Chain Social Club.
Yeah, which is
And then
huge, by the way. I mean, it's such a valuable tool, and right, and COVID kind of pushed us into this remote component, and I think, we're climbing further and further away from that. And as somebody who has worked remote for 15 years, and at one point had 3 offices around the country that collected dust because I worked remote. Um, right, we've moved into a place where it has unlocked a lot of things that we had not seen before, and it's still so valuable. It's the way that we should be moving forward in a lot of aspects. We still need the human connection. I still like hugging people, but and shaking hands. But yeah, what you created there was um incredible, to say the least. And so right now I'm giving you some kudos. Um, yeah, good job. You and Chris, obviously, co-founder of that space. So,
hmm
okay, so continue on. Yeah, tell us more about, yeah, the supply chainy network and different things that are happening. And then I want to start digging into asking some questions specifically about podcast guests, but go ahead.
okay, all right. Well, to that end, talking about networking and things, I do also still believe that in person is the really the best. And so what I like to say is that, virtual networking, like what we do at the Supply Chain Social Club, gets you about 80% of the way. You can have this, you can see the facial expressions, you can hear how they respond, you can see a little bit of the body language, at least like from the chest up. But it turns out that being able to see what's going on with their feet. How tall is this person? Are they actually bigger than they look like on camera,
Right.
or are they just a smaller person? Like you don't really get that last 20% of context and body language and that just in person bit. But I
Yeah.
like to say that the virtual networking gets you 80% of the way there, which is
Yeah.
much further than you'd get without it, right? So,
That's true.
um, so that was happening, and there was some folks, Glenn Lopresti at Tax specifically, I'll shout out to him, saying, "Hey, you should do this in person as well because these virtual things are cool, but it'd be really cool if we could meet all these people that we're meeting virtually in person also." So
Yeah.
that I was kind of drug into it. I did it reluctantly, but what I've learned now is when people are giving you signals of what you should do and how you can build your business, don't totally ignore that. Kind of go with it a little bit. And
Yeah.
so I did. So now, I really happy to say, that we've got virtual events and in-person events. And also to your point, a shout out to Chris Pride. He was always my brainstorming person on all of this because
Mhm.
he was the person that introduced this virtual networking platform to me during COVID. It's how he and I met. Actually, he was the president of the Chicago CSCMP Roundtable. I was in Dallas, and we were using this platform for virtual networking through COVID time. And that's how I met him in the first place. And when COVID was done, everyone went back to hugging and shaking hands at in-person events. But I just felt like there was an opportunity. And that's really what kind of started the virtual networking and supply chain social club.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
but it's evolved. And so, the latest development, I guess, if you will, in the supply chain service club space is that we've realized that, we love bringing people together for, a couple, 2 or 3 events a month. But what we really missed is we still actually, as convenient as virtual events should be, we still actually weren't able to get everyone on board and get it working with everyone's schedules. So kind of the next step that we've taken now is to start building a community platform where conversations and connections can be being made all the time, not just at these events virtually or in person, but there's kind of an opportunity for us to help foster and have a space for folks all the time. So that's kind of where Spider and Social Club is today. Where it will be in the future, I don't know. But it's gonna just, yeah, as everything, I'm gonna just keep growing that thing.
Yeah.
And so And now I've got more people on the bus, on the supply chainy bus, to help grow that thing. So,
Sure.
so that's a whole
Yeah.
different topic, maybe.
So what are some of the so we've talked about, the networking component of supply chaining,
Yep.
which I would argue is everything. But just tell us more about some of the other things. I mean, obviously, a lot of people. There's this common quote of "I see you everywhere." So tell us a little
Hmm.
bit more
Hmm.
about that, right? Like, and how you are becoming a face in the convention and event space. I mean, which
Hmm.
you're at a event right now. But
Sure.
so
Sure.
unpack a little bit about that and what that looks like, just real quickly, and then some of the other
Sure.
offers as well that supply chaining
Yeah.
is doing.
So let's see. So if we kind of like just back up out of that alley we were in for the supply
Yeah.
chain social club, and
Oh,
then kind of just
yeah.
point this vehicle down the supply chain path again. Um, what I was realizing is that if you're going to kind of keep growing in something, you at some point maybe run out of real estate or space. And that kind of seemed to be what was happening in the supply chain world. Is we had this podcast and was really fortunate, and Sergere kind of out of the blue popped up and said, "Hey, can we sponsor your podcast?" And that was really the first little hint of what having a sponsor felt like. Advertising revenue. I'd never thought that this was a path forward. Um, but shout out to Michael at Sergere for being that first little thing that got this flywheel starting. And with that was like, okay, so we've got the podcast, we've got what else can we do? Well, let's start a newsletter. It was just like the podcast again. I was not a frequent reader of newsletters. I didn't love them myself. Um, but it was an opportunity again to share voices, to be a resource for the industry, which supply chain's mission is to be a creative, connected, and capable supply chain resource. And so
Yeah.
what you'll see over time is all the things that keep getting added on to this rocket,
Yes.
all try to accomplish that mission. And so
Sure.
a newsletter does accomplish that, but I wanted to make sure that it was done in a way that also kind of spoke to the collaborative, authentic, energetic, sort of
Yeah.
curious
The
nature
the
of supply chaining.
the ethos of supply chaining.
There you go. Yeah. And so spend a little bit of time again studying newsletters and how can we build something a little bit different. Asked you for some inputs and help as well coming up with a plan for this. And the path forward is a path forward that I think is going to keep repeating itself within the supply chain world, which is to collaborate and bring in others. And so that newsletter ultimately was, let's get like 30 different voices and influencers and subject matter experts from the supply chain industry to all be contributors to this thing,
Well, and then
and
may
share
I
what
make
they're
a
doing.
note. You use the word influencers, but I think it's really important to highlight that the influencers and the content creators in our ecosystem are industry experts, are subject
Right.
matter experts,
Yep.
hands down, right? I mean, the
That's true.
average time is 20 years in the industry if you're going to be part of supply chain network. Not always, but
Yes,
so
that's definitely one thing we've noticed, right? Is
sure.
there's not anybody faking being a supply chain
Yeah.
practitioner
Yeah.
to start a supply chain podcast.
Yeah.
I think maybe I've heard of one or two from third hand knowledge. Um, but it's not a thing that you do if you're not passionate about it and you don't actually have real boots on the ground experience with it. And so,
Yeah.
um, so we started the newsletter. We've started, I've always been big on events. So I really doubled down on trying to help be a resource on the events and networking side. So
Yeah.
launched a calendar on my website, the supplychain.com website that aggregated as many possible supply chain events as possible in one
Yeah.
place. Um,
And
because
and
I was,
and
yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt here, but you know how many times that like we're at a convention or at an event and I have somebody walk up to me and say, that is the resource that we use to know what's happening. And I mean it's awesome. There's no better word to say. Like it's awesome to be part of that resource that people use of what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? what's Nathan doing? Where is he going to go? How does this provide value to my company? And I know we have some things in the pipeline that are going to be able to expand on that. And we can speak to that at a later date potentially. But
Yeah.
so events, conventions, calendar, yeah,
Yeah. So, I think the idea that I had there to be a resource in the event space has gone more successfully than I could have ever imagined. And and so part of that was starting it every Monday. I've been doing this for over a year now. I go on every Monday onto LinkedIn. I say, here's the events that are coming up in the industry. At some point, I transition that to a thing that I bring guests on that are hosting events for them to talk about the events. And like, so you basically picture like David Letterman and how, whenever the Titanic was coming out, he had Leonardo DiCaprio come on stage, a week or two before the premiere to talk about this movie that's coming out. And so really that was the inspiration behind, hey, if there's these big kind of events going on in the industry, how cool would it be for those folks that are putting those things on to come on and talk about them before they happen? And so a lot of the things that we do at Supply Chain actually turns out we're kind of just borrowing and stealing from other industries and pulling concepts maybe they're happening in the consumer, the B2C world, or in media or entertainment. And we're trying to just kind of pull them into supply chain, kind of make it a little more fun, I think.
yeah,
And so what all that, just having folks correlate supply chain events with supply chainy ultimately really just kind of lended itself to getting invitations to those. And it didn't hurt that I also had a camera and a microphone in hand at all times at every event, always creating content.
yeah,
And so to the point now that I think I went to about 30 conferences and things around the world last year, and I'll get to 30 or 40 this year. Um, but again, it's networking at at scale, you could say, and really capturing a lot of those conversations I'm having and sharing them with everybody, and just kind of taking folks along for the ride because not everyone can get themselves to a lot of conferences, and so
sure,
part of my mission here with that is to share what the takeaways are, what the vibe and what the feel is of being at these conferences is with
yeah.
folks wherever they might be in the world. So Curtis, I think what you're picking up on there is we like to hang out and talk with and promote uh, companies that actually are embracing social media as a channel for marketing. And it, again, not on purpose, but it seems like kind of just the right time, right place sort of thing of
Sure.
um, that this concept of media in the industry is evolving a little bit, and folks are getting more and more of their information and their insights and news from individual content creators that again have been people that have been in the industry, have a lot of passion for it, and are now creating content and sharing perspectives and views and insights. And that's really kind of where supply chain is. And
Yeah,
I've often been asked, "Oh, you're like a podcaster because you have a podcast," and I would say yes to that earlier on, but recently, I now that we've got the newsletter and Supply Chain Social Club and the events and all this sort of stuff, it's like, no, actually, I think supply chain is actually kind of like a media company, but
yeah,
not in the traditional sense that we're running cable news 24/7 or we have a magazine that prints and goes out, every month, but a social media company, and I
sure,
think that that's kind of where things are. And
yeah,
and there's still a lot of companies shifting and adopting that as part of their marketing strategy. But the other thing is if you think about we're working and talking with a lot of startups and innovators in the space, is because maybe they actually don't have the budget for the legacy media company sort of
yeah,
ad spend. And so social media happens to be a little more accessible for folks that have a little bit smaller budgets. And it actually works probably pretty well because that sort of media and content creator marketing is kind of, I think, where things are headed. And
oh,
uh, yeah.
hands down, right, like, supply chaining is right, like, you were talking about signals earlier and how things can pivot and shift, and part of that is exactly what you just said, right, like, we're moving from SEO over to GEO, right, like, large language model searching, right, the fundamental components are changing, and the way that companies are being found today are by human voices. You are a human. You're a human voice, right? Our content creator network is human voices. It
And
is it is based upon authenticity, and this is what you're creating. And companies are they're starting to slice out part of their budget for content creators, for companies like Supply Chainy, right,
Yeah.
to be able to deliver those human voices, and which is extremely important, right? Because now Supply Chainy now exists as these budgets start to open up. Where do they go? And how do we get that human voice? So anyway,
Yep.
continue on.
Yeah. So I think where things are going is that, supply chain can only really exist, in one slice of the whole world and people's
Yeah,
attention. And so the idea now is to really lean into that concept of being collaborative, kind of like what was done with the newsletter. And
yeah,
so, the 2.0 version of this is to be collaborative and help bring together, all the there's a good number of content creators, podcasters, influencers, if you want to call them, in the industry. And there's some that are very established. There's a few folks out there that have had supply chain podcasts and things for over a decade, and so they're very very experienced and seen in the marketplace. But there's 10 times as many folks that are coming up, if you want to say, and
yeah,
uh, I get approached a lot about them, about just getting some advice. And so there's a desire and a need there. And so I feel like supply chain is in a great position to be able to try to sit in between, and help
yeah,
kind of incubate and mentor and grow this sort of cohort of voices in the industry, and be creative and be kind of this agency, if you will, to kind of just help make
sure,
sure that marketers get access to these voices and these voices get access to the marketers,
yep,
and bring all these folks together at the same table. So that's one
yeah.
of the next things that, we're kind of working on as we keep kind of just building this supply chain thing.
Very cool. Very cool. So, okay. So I'm going to do a pivot real quick because we're going to
Yep.
start to wrap things up, kind of get into the end game here.
Yeah.
So you've had a technically 99 conversations on the podcast now with industry experts, um, influential contributors. What is but all in the logistics and supply chain space? What is your takeaway, Nathan Chaney, of what's a consistent theme that you've heard over these 99 episodes?
Yep. Okay. So I would say there's two, two main
Okay.
takeaways.
Yeah.
One is most people did not intend to get into the supply chain industry. They're
Okay.
industrial engineers or they're electrical they came into the industry from somewhere else. And um I kind of explain that by saying that there historically were not logistics and supply chain degrees in the past. And so the industry kind of like borrowed and stole from other professions and other
Yeah.
degree programs to create kind of the supply chain leaders that we have in place today. Now, since our generation, there's been proliferation of logistics and supply chain degree programs. So now, younger generations are actually going and choosing and wanting to be in supply chain. COVID had a lot to do with that and getting kind of supply chain on the map, if you will. But this concept that a lot of people didn't intend to be here. A cousin invited them to come work for a company when they needed a job, and then they just stayed there for 30 years, and now they're the vice president. So that
I,
story repeats itself a lot. So the second big takeaway that I've kind of taken away from these 100 or 99 podcasts, is that the industry of logistics supply chain is really filled with people who like to solve problems. And that's really probably like the baseline concept of what everyone kind of finds and why they stay here is because it's always evolving. There's always other legislative or geopolitical or economic, whatever sort of problems in the world. And supply chains kind of have to jive and kind of work with those things and overcome them. And then there's just always new technology being introduced into the space. So there's always continuous improvement having to happen. And so the kind of the big takeaway is if you are somebody who likes to not be comfortable, who likes to never really just be settled and just be okay stamping papers all day and passing them through a hole in the wall sort of thing to the other side, then the supply chain industry is a good place to be. We are all firefighters, as someone once said,
Yeah.
because there's an endless amount of problems to always be solving. And when things are quiet, you might want to be concerned a little bit because that means something's going wrong somewhere you don't know about it, right? But the idea that logistics supply chain folks are just really driven to go solve problems. I think that's the second biggest takeaway that I've gotten from all the podcasts that I've hosted.
Nice. Nice. That's if I were to point a student to this podcast, I think that's exactly where I would drop them in at.
Okay.
Um, right? That would be a good uh bit of information throughout the journey of education. What do I want to do? So
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to talk about?
That question I asked to Paul Sivaswamy in an episode, might have been number 7 or 9. It was in the first dozen, I think.
Yeah.
And he answered, supply chain is my ikigai. And I was like, I've never heard this before. Tell me more about it. So he
Yeah.
explained what ikigai is. And in that podcast, he explained it to me. And I think you could probably like hear like this thing in my voice being like this aha moment. Because it was at about that point in kind of creating supply chain that I had realized that supply chainee was that ikigai for me. And so those who aren't familiar, you can go Google it. But it's a Venn diagram basically where with 4 circles, and they are, what the world needs, what you're good at, what you love doing, what you can make money doing. And if you can find the intersection point of all 4 of those circles, this is your reason for being or your ikigai. And the thing I would like to just share with folks is that I didn't, walk out of college knowing what my purpose and reason for being was. I wasn't even 10 years later that I knew what that was. I was still kind of just chasing a bigger paycheck and a bigger title and a nicer car sort of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't really have a real reason or a way that I'm giving back in a meaningful way to the industry or to just humanity in any sort of level. But I had to go through all of those hot, sweaty days in warehouses and early mornings in trucks, and kind of just getting dirt under my fingernails and not exactly having a real purpose in all of this yet, other than a paycheck, until I could kind of find what that was for me. And that has turned out to be supply chain. And I feel very fortunate to have finally found it. It took a while. But I've kind of found what that purpose in life is. And now waking up in the morning, traveling around the world, being up late at a happy hour. Oh, it's so hard. Like none of this actually feels like work. Sure, it's a countless number of hours to build something from scratch. Anyone building a business will understand that. But when it's at the intersection of what you love, what the world needs, what you enjoy doing, and what you're good at doing, then it doesn't feel like work. And I would just encourage folks to just keep in mind that even though you maybe haven't arrived yet, maybe you're not in that place where everything just clicks automatically. It just feels like magic every day you wake up. You will get there. Stick with it. Talk to friends and family, mentors, read, listen to podcasts. Like just be always absorbing information from others, and you will get to that point. And I really just wish for everyone to be able to experience that and get to that point as soon as possible, because when you get there, it's like it's nirvana, and you really feel every day like you have a purpose in life. And that's, if I can help anyone to talk through that, I've been actually starting to help folks have that conversation of how do they kind of find that ikigai as well. And so I just wish that for everybody. And if I can help out, I would love to. But that's the thing I would like to leave with everybody with.
Man, I don't think that we can continue this podcast on because that was so powerful. We got to close this out. There's not a stronger closing, and it is one of the reasons, man. I love you like a brother. I respect and value you as a human, and I want to share you to everybody that I possibly can, because I think you're awesome. And so
I'm not
let me
I'm
just
not
close it out.
crying.
Right, where can people find you? And I know it's a silly question. I know how to answer this, but you still need to call to it. And then also give me a 1 minute plug on the book that you're about to come out with.
Yeah. All right. So people can find me anywhere. You just type Nathan Chaney or Supply Chaney and to any sort of system somewhere. That one's easy. If you are, quote unquote, an influencer in the industry, the idea is to be easy to be found.
Yeah.
So don't need to go into detail on that one too much. But the plug for the book, I suppose, is well, one of those things about supply chain is trying to be creative. It's the first C in the, sort of the mission statement of being creative. And so one of those ways to do that is to just make use of the tools we have out there. So the idea here is to create something tangible. Like these podcasts are all interesting and cool, but they just live in the digital world in a cloud somewhere in a data center. So the concept here is with this 100th podcast, we're going to cap this off the first 100 and put these things into a book that you can hold in your hand where you can kind of read quick digests of people's stories, their takeaways and lessons from their careers, and have this as a physical kind of reminder or memento from the industry that these voices don't just exist digitally, that they are actually physical and in the real world. And this is the way for us to kind of manifest that in something you can hold in your hand. And so it's going to be called Supply Chain Story Time. Insights from the first 100 podcasts of the Supply Chain podcast. And I'm excited to get it out there and just all at the end of the day, I just like having fun talking about supply chain with people. That's
Yep.
all it is.
Hey, you know what? That's all we can do. That's all we know. So, with that said, you've been an incredible guest and an incredible host, and I look forward to continuing to watch the podcast, listen to the podcast, and
Edit
see
the podcast.
from the podcast from 101 to 200. Right. That's kind of that second chapter, and so
Yep.
yeah, awesome.
All
Well,
right.
thanks so much. Yeah, and I guess until next time.
Adios.
All right, bye.